Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second in our series of creative conversations. Tonight, we're really delighted to welcome the artists Eileen Cooper and Rachel Jones, who are going to be in conversation. They're going to be moving between painting and drawing as they share their personal views on the changing experience of women in art schools and in the art world. And they'll be considering important questions concerning the demands of exhibiting, relationships with galleries, and sustaining an artistic practice, as well as touching on questions of personal identity and activism. So to introduce them both, Eileen Cooper RA is well known for her work in painting, drawing, and printmaking, with the female figure at the centre of her practice. She studied at Goldsmiths and the Royal College of Art and has taught at many art schools, including the Royal Academy schools. She served as keeper of the Royal Academy between 2010 and 17, making her the first woman in the history of the Academy to do so. She was awarded an OBE for services to art and art education in 2016, and her commitment to the development of emerging artists continues to be a particular focus. Rachel Jones completed her BA in Fine Art at Glasgow School of Art and an MA in Fine Art at the Royal Academy. Her work has been exhibited in the UK at Gallery Ropac, the Sunday Painter, and institutions such as the Royal Scottish Academy. She was artist in residence at the Chinati Foundation and Masterworks Museum of Bermuda Art in 2016. And she's interested in exploring the complexities surrounding society's reading of the Black body, how it's understood, how it's culturally reproduced, and the potential role of these representations in dismantling existing power structures. She's interested in using colour in a way that enables her to form a visual language as a substitute for words. So both Eileen and Rachel tell me they've been inspiringly productive through lockdown and have developed new creative strategies over the past few months. So I'm looking forward to hearing about their recent work this evening. And before I hand over to them, I just want to remind you all listening, please, you're very welcome to ask questions using the chat box, or you can wait to the end to address Eileen and Rachel directly using the participants tab and just raise your hand. So welcome Eileen and Rachel, and thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here.
Hi, thanks for having me as well. So should we just start, Rachel?
Yeah, let's just go for it. Yeah.
I think this is very much going to be a conversation that's unstructured, but I do have a few questions for you to start us off.
Okay.
I suppose I have to ask, how's it been over lockdown?
I have had the fortunate situation of not having to really do anything other than go to the studio. Like all my family and friends, they're safe and have been during this time. So I was able just to take time off to rest. The first couple of weeks, all I did was sleep because I think I was doing too much prior to lockdown. So my body sort of shut down. And then after that, I was going into the studio pretty much every day because I'm in there on my own. So I wasn't coming into contact with anyone. And I got into a really good work routine where I would kind of stop wasting time. Like I spend a lot of time sitting down, being on my phone, like just pottering around before I actually do any work. But during lockdown, I got into a pattern of spending as much time as I needed to in the studio. And then as soon as I'd finished working, I would just go home and do other things. So
I'm interested to hear that you were pretty exhausted before lockdown. So did lockdown save you really? Why were you exhausted?
Well, I was teaching and I was juggling going into the studio, and then I am currently working on a campaign. I'm doing social justice work. So it was difficult to manage all of those things. Yeah. And I think, you know, when you live in London, you always do too much, and you want to see people, you want to have fun. So yeah, the lockdown just enabled me to cut back on things that I didn't need to.
And has your work changed really during lockdown?
I wouldn't say it's changed. I think since I left the RA and I went to do my residency at the Chinati Foundation in Texas, there was a shift then. And so after that, I was just developing what
So I see an amazing shift in scale.
Yeah, well, I mean, I normally worked on only large scale paintings, but being in Texas, I couldn't bring anything larger than what would fit in my suitcase. So I started making smaller paintings.
I remember interviewing you at the Royal Academy Schools, and your work was much more figurative then, but it was always very large scale.
Yeah.
And then you worked quite small and quite intensely, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's nice to have a variety of both. I don't know if, I mean, you work on a large scale, and I think there is a lot of freedom in terms of like gesture and spatial awareness, and those things are really part of what it is to make a painting, like technical things. But with the small work, they were more explorative and like fun for me, because I don't normally do that.
Well, I feel like I'm such a product of my generation and the way I was taught. And you know, when I was working in the 80s, I thought my work looked of the moment, which perhaps it did. And now it sort of doesn't. It looks like the work of an older person. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of artists. I mean, obviously you want your work to keep developing and growing, but looking back, that's how I see it now. And I equally, I think your work is incredibly youthful and exuberant.
Would you say though that maybe what you would consider as looking old is more that I think that you have like a very confident and a very distinctive way of working, and the older you get, the more that just becomes, I don't know, like it becomes definitive of like partly of like who you are and your practice. And I think that is something that most artists want to have, I would say.
At the same time, you have to struggle to subvert yourself a little bit. I mean, I think we do all work within quite particular furrows, but within that, you always want it to be exciting. One of the ways I keep it exciting is to work with different materials. And I like degrees of difficulty in my work, and materials and subject matter. And I noticed that I saw a video of you talking about your work, and you talk about friction.
Yeah.
What do you mean by friction?
I think similar to what you were saying, when you get used to your materials and you get used to working in a certain way, you have to find ways, well, you don't have to, but it's good to find ways, I think, to disrupt that. And that forces you to learn, and it forces you to create something different than what you're used to producing. And in the images and the paintings that I make, I'm interested in the color itself having to figure out a relationship with each other where they don't necessarily fit or they're not necessarily complementary, but there is a degree of relation between them. And so that's something which takes time to figure out.
When you're working them, Rachel, are you very close up?
Well, for something like this, what's on the screen now, that will be done with me like looking down on a table and like, you know, making marks or whatever. But the larger paintings are always on a wall, so I just staple canvas to the wall and then like go from there. So I go from looking, you know, like bird's eye view to flat.
Do you remember when we had our little run through to see if we'd have anything to talk about? And we immediately...
I thought you've asked me 10 questions already, Eileen.
We immediately started to talk about our relationship with drawing.
Yeah.
And I think at Glasgow, you did have to draw objectively in the life room a lot, didn't you?
Yeah, you had to do it for, I think you had to do it for 2 years because the course is for 4 years, but I went into the second year because I did a foundation at Camberwell. So I only had 1 year of life drawing, but then I asked to carry on doing it. And I think most people probably have a slightly reluctant attitude towards being made to draw, but in all honesty, I think it is the foundation for teaching you how to look. And
that's the thing.
Teaching you how to think, how you look and describe, because that's what drawing is, I think. And so it doesn't have to be with a pencil, or like it doesn't have to be with something you put in your hand and makes a mark on paper. Drawing can be lots of different things, but it's about looking and describing.
I love the fact that it's responsive and not really very is not, I mean, I know that some of it is intellectual, but kind of at the back of your mind. It's very much to do with as you say, looking and the
Yeah.
sensation of the materials and marks. It's very intuitive. I mean, I think, would you describe your paintings as coloured drawings, or is there a term? I mean,
I wouldn't describe them as coloured drawings, but I can't deny that there is a strong element of drawing within them. And it's interesting because it's the first time I've ever looked at my work and understood it outside the context of painting. I've always seen the drawings that I do as being like subsidiary to the painting. It's like the drawing is a little thing and the painting is the big thing. But I've done away with that, and there is no hierarchy between drawing and painting, and they sort of amalgamated into being one thing. And it's partly because of how they're made. I just have an oil pastel and an oil stick, and so it's like I'm drawing, but then the process, it becomes more like painting. The material itself is just pure oil, and so there's like a combination of both things together. But yeah, it's neither or neither.
When we put the slideshow together, I realised that there is a real colour overlap, and that we're quite red and blue.
Yes,
And I once had a wonderful conversation with Ken Kiff when obviously he's died.
Oh my gosh, I love him.
And he said, Eileen, you're a very red blue artist, and he said, and I'm very red green, and that is so true. And I've spent a lifetime being terrified of green. And I'm just beginning to be. Oh, I'm wearing it. I'm just beginning to be brave to take on that thing.
So that's interesting. So you instinctively are just drawn to those colours and they just find their way into the work, you think?
But within them, like if I needed to use green, I'd knock it right towards yellow. And or within the reds, they'd move right through to really dark Indian red and oranges, which you use a lot. But I think what dominates my work in a little way, how you're talking about drawing, is the line. I'm so slavish to the line. I love the fact that you don't have line in your work at the moment. And when you talk, you have edges. And the line's made of edges. But for me, I'm like, God, it's like a whip. I get it out and I whip it around the painting. There's no escaping it.
That's a really nice way to describe it. But I think it's nice though, because that's just you working intuitively. Do you know what I mean? And at the moment, this is how, I suppose looking and describing and thinking about things. But I do have to catch myself in the fact that I fall into habits of using a lot of red. And so blue for me was a colour that I found hard to use. So that's why I was like, I need to put it in there, because I can't just have colours that are easy for me to work with. So that's where that comes
from.
Very,
very beautiful piece.
Thanks.
Do you miss the rectangle, the hard edge rectangle of a canvas?
No, I like having both. It's fun not to have to work within what is like a familiar boundary, and especially when you think about painting, it's always this idea of a rectangle or a square. And I suppose I wanted to make painting personal to me and relevant.
That's a very good point for me to ask my next question, because I noticed in the introduction it's described that we would talk about being women in the art world. But in terms of the subject matter, the female and the body and the female experience is very obvious in mine. It's very hidden in a way in yours, and yet you talk again in this same video about the images of the mouth a lot.
Well, I think
and mouth, what's that about?
Well, I think so, like what I was saying, like about things being personal to me, I don't want there to be a literal depiction of myself in the painting, but I want there to be a sense of identity. And I realized that for me to do that, if I was going to abstract the body, it would be useful for there to be like a symbol somehow. So that's where the idea of the mouth and teeth came in. And all of this work is relatively recent, but I think the more I make, the more that will have meaning and people will be able to understand what that represents. And it's just a way for me to slowly start to create like my own personal narrative and a story.
Interesting that you use me. You do say it's you, it's me in that painting.
Yeah.
Whereas I often get away from that by saying, oh, there's a universality there. It's kind of me, but it's also you and every woman.
Even though you're because you sometimes, you work from images, but recently you worked from life. So how do you feel then when you're making a portrait of someone that you know?
That was a complete revelation, and I hadn't done it since I was a student.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Probably since
but how timely that I brought this up.
I found the bigger my drawings, the better they were. They were very intensive because I decided just to draw them pretty much from the sitting the person came to. You came for a sitting, and it was about 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like a quest I was on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it came as I finished my long teaching career.
Okay.
And it was also to do with saying goodbye to that, celebrating the people I'd recently been teaching, because obviously sometimes people contact me and I taught them 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But it was very much to do with that coming to terms with moving on to another life and wanting to equip myself with some new skills, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because I think that one of the things that I find most useful, like I figured this out when I was at art school, both at the RA in Glasgow, is that you have to push yourself in the work, and this comes back to what you were saying about trying to use colors that you don't like, and like me having the same sort of attitude. You don't want to find yourself making things which become habitual, and for you don't really, I don't know, they don't resonate with you in a way where you feel like you're learning. Like you don't want to be, everyone gets stuck in a rut, but it's about growing and going on a journey.
So one of the things I would say to all younger artists is expand your skill set and try to work with different materials, whether it's found objects or printmaking or different materials processes.
Yeah.
I love working on paper because I know that I can tear and reassemble. So collage is a very important thing to me. And you do have to find ways of keeping it fresh.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm also a great looker at other art, mainly art history, I have to say. So I sometimes very directly work from art, other people's pictures or photographs or movies or cartoons particularly.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things Paula Rego talks about, one of the things she talks about is what an impact Disney Snow White had on her as a young woman. And you can't imagine, with all the sophistication of animation and movies now, how raw those feelings were when you saw those moving images as a child. I mean, I'm younger than Paula, but I think I share a little bit of that.
But still, yeah, and even the idea of like finding magic in something new that you never thought existed, and you're like, oh, how do I recreate that? Or how do I, like, just making something and a little bit of it is going to be like, how do I manifest this in a way where it becomes part of my practice and I learn how to create
I also think the magic comes out of disaster.
Yeah, facts.
It really does.
Yeah.
And that's why I love paper, because it's so flexible. Another old Royal Academician, very elderly now, she's 89, who I met when we were hanging the summer show a few years ago, Elizabeth Blackadder, talked about her watercolours, and they look so perfect, don't they? And yet she said they go horribly wrong. She sticks them under the tap in the kitchen, washes them off. That just complete frustration, and then you've got yourself into a stage where you've nothing to lose. It's already.
Yeah, exactly. You have to keep on pushing. I remember when I was in my first year at the RA, I hadn't made a painting for nearly a year, and I freaked out. I was like, oh, they've accepted me here. I showed them a bunch of paintings at my interview, so they'll be expecting me to make paintings. And I was so sort of immobilized by the fact that I had this level of imagined, I think, expectation. And so I was like, let me just do something completely random. And I don't know why, but I just started writing. And then that became a really important part of my practice, and I write now. And
Gosh,
that would never have happened if I hadn't found myself in a corner and just decided, well, instead of beating myself about it, let me just try something, you know.
Do you want to share what your writing's about?
So it's creative. It's like a mixture of prose and poetry, but it's the same as my paintings, really. They're about my personal reflections on life. So they talk about grief, sex, they talk about making art, relationships, and then really mundane things. There are whole sections that focus on color, and it's just like a mishmash of everything. So it's not guided by anything other than like what I feel that day, really, or what I'm interested in at that time.
Going off on a tangent, I know that activism is very important to you, and that you have projects that you've been working on for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit about?
Yeah. So
you always had a social conscience. Does it come from that?
I think so, and just more about having an awareness that art can only do so much. Like, it's very useful, it's a crucial and wonderful part of life, but existing within the art world and wanting to create change, there are certain limitations depending on what it is you want to do. And being a young Black woman, like my experience of life, it is challenging, it's difficult, and I just felt like there are things I could do outside of art school that combated that. So I've been involved in,
presumably to be part of a group that are more organised, makes it an easier.
Definitely, because you know, you often feel like, oh, I want to do something but I don't know how. And so working with people who have experience, or volunteering, like that's how I got into doing pretty much everything that I do. Like I got into teaching through volunteering, I got into the social work that I do through volunteering, and it's just it's a journey for everybody. But I got to a point where I felt like I had the energy to put into focusing on something specific. So I'm working on a campaign to address the relationship between young people and the police at the moment.
That's exciting. And is that presumably London based?
Yeah. It's based in London. It was across London, and then specifically in Hackney to a certain extent. But just across.
And how much of your time, Rachel, might that take up?
Oh my days. Well, during everything that happened recently with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, it became very, very difficult to focus on being in the studio, because I had to be at so many meetings because I was a co-chair for a campaign. So I was organising meetings and chairing them and just trying to push our agenda forward. And so I would say, sometimes I would spend like every day in a meeting. And the thing with that is it's emotionally draining, and you're having difficult conversations with people, people high up in the Met Police, you're meeting with community organisers, young people at the centre of everything we do. And it was just, it was hard for me to find a balance. And it was...
Is that why you were partly exhausted when lockdown came?
Well, because I was doing that and then also teaching, and I wasn't teaching in the same place. I'd be like lecturing at unis, and then I'd be going to the Royal Academy to do workshops. So it's just very full on. But you know, it's worth it. Nothing is easy when you're trying to change things. I mean, you would know that you're the first woman to be a keeper of the RA. I'm sure you encountered lots of pressures in that role, surely.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated by how different my experience at art school at Goldsmiths was than, you know, anybody I've ever taught. So we had no female members of staff in my first year at Goldsmiths. Unbelievable, isn't it?
I mean, it's hard for me because I think I really take for granted the fact that you were a keeper and there were women in the school, like, you know. I forget that it's only recently like that has become something which is considered to be the norm, you know.
So this word feminism emerged in the 70s. Maybe I was just dumb. People had already been talking about it, but I was 18 in 1971, and people would say, "Are you a feminist?" I thought, "Oh God, what is that?" And then I discovered artists like Judy Chicago, and the Americans, of course, were way ahead of us. So it felt you know, the mantra from feminism, the personal is political,
yeah,
has always seemed right for me. And as the women have got, you know, into much better positions, I think the thing that I feel really passionate about now is more of social mobility.
yeah,
Because people used to talk about the sexism in the art world, but they never really talked about the incredible privilege which ran the art world.
Yeah,
Those people who were either Oxford, Cambridge, or public school, you know, that was taken for granted, let alone, you know, trying to be a young woman.
Yeah.
I mean, times 20, had I been a young black woman.
Yeah.
And my friend at the Royal College, Andre Reed, was the only black artist who I encountered at art school.
Yeah, and it's something which, I mean, people are talking about it now, and I think one of the things is that we have an opportunity now. If institutions and universities and schools are saying, oh yeah, we see there's a problem, they need to realize that it's their responsibility to work with partners or to put an infrastructure in where they're really addressing it. So I mean, at the RA, we talk all the time about the school needing to do outreach, to working with younger students, because loads of people don't know that there are certain steps to follow to go to art school. Like, what accessibility is there for people who don't come from artistic backgrounds or who don't have necessarily the support to get them to art school? You know, like you said, it's a financial commitment, which a lot of people aren't necessarily going to get to see the benefit of immediately once they leave. You know, it's hard to create a career outside of this. And before we started
it's really hard without a network. You need a support system. I don't mean a network in a cynical way. I mean your peer group, you know, you're established, you know, to find a studio, you find it maybe through friends.
Word of mouth, exactly. Yeah. And people to talk to you about your work, and a suggestion for maybe doing this thing or that thing, or someone introducing you to a gallery, or, you know, a collector.
Speaking of galleries, Rachel, another thing we were supposed to discuss is minefield of galleries. How are you finding that?
Well, I think it's interesting because I've come to the short and sharp shock that I need to think about these things more seriously, because before this I was just like going from exhibition to exhibition whenever I got the chance to, and wasn't really thinking long term about working with the gallery. But I suppose it's good to have an idea of what it is you would like out of your career or your life as an artist, and the things that gallery provide is what you're saying, like support. They can guide you through situations, like help you consider, where do you want to be exhibiting, what sort of shows do you want to be making. They support you with the creation of work, and can offer critical advice, and obviously that's all so valuable. But at the same time, you have to address the fact that the art world today is fully it revolves around an art market which is so focused on money and like status.
How do you feel your work and yourself being a commodity?
I mean, that's not what you are, and that's not what your artwork is. It's not something which has value placed on it by people outside who see an opportunity to make money. Like, that's not what art is. And so
one thing that I'm very encouraged by, and you know, happened kind of mid-90s on, I suppose, since the recession before the last recession, the art world opened up, because lots of younger artists and dealers started to open galleries or showing spaces for themselves. So there are lots of different levels, and it's important to see that there are lots of ways to have a career. Not everybody is temperamentally suited to the pressures of, you know, of that art market thing that we just touched on. That is,
it can be intense. And so like there, like you said,
I know young artists
there are people who like you said have different spaces, like project spaces that are set up often by people who are artists. There are smaller galleries, and so there are different ways to live as an artist without it having to be
are you interested in curation?
Oh no, that's not really my thing. I feel like
I never was, because again, being older, curation wasn't really a thing. It was, people used to hang exhibitions, you know, people who'd done art history would hang exhibitions, and then the whole cult of the curator became a thing. And then for a while I felt like the artists were only there to service the curators and to fit in with their thesis about whatever they wanted. But I've come around a bit now, and I find curation much more of an interesting proposition, really.
No,
and it's a way of giving people you believe in a leg up.
Yeah, no, totally. And if you work with a curator who has a broad understanding of art history, but also what's being made now, contemporary art, then you can have a relationship where they really draw the best out of you in terms of exhibiting your work and making an exhibition, because creating an exhibition is different to creating artworks. And so sometimes having a curator like helps you get to that point.
But I think you'll know when you experience that and somebody oversteps the mark, because I know lots of artists that happens to. You know, they do a new body of work, and then the gallerist or the curator that they worked with doesn't quite fit with their agenda, or they don't think they can sell it, and that is really painful, and that's difficult to negotiate at any age, actually.
Because I suppose one of the things about what we do as artists, and what I'm sure the people listening do, is that you have your own personal interests and like reasons for making work, but once you consider the broader landscape, you realize that a lot of what you do is built on relationships with people and support and networks, like what you said, Eileen. And so if you are finding it difficult to find useful relationships, then it can be hard, and it can have an effect on how you work and how you feel about your work as well. So it can be challenging, but you know, you learn through difficult experiences, and sometimes you have to learn to have a voice and say no. That's a really important thing, like not being afraid to defend a position that you have, or not being intimidated into doing something you're not entirely excited about, and just, you know, being honest with you about what it is that you want for the work and what the work deserves.
So having said that, I was worried about the whole commodification of the art world and the huge you know, money aspect to it. Women's work is still incredibly undervalued. And you know, if people are buying purely for investment and cynically to move money around the world, which I don't know, I'm not an authority, but I'm just speculating, and little bit of hearsay here, then how are women ever going to be rated in those top tiers if our work isn't monetarized in the same way?
I think I suppose the issue with women's work not going for as much at like auction or whatever, that is more to do with, it's not, I mean, at that stage, it's still a commodity, but it's the fact that the systems that operate benefit some people more than others. And that is to do with societal issues that we have with regards to gender and class and race. And so that is something which is across the board, I would say, with everything. I mean, women and men don't get the same pay, you know.
The complete killer, of course, is fashion, that go in and out of fashion. So you can never really relax and think, God, I've got the mortgage and now I'm going to be earning so much for the next 20 years. It just doesn't happen like that unless you're super successful.
Well, that's kind of what we were talking about a wee while ago, about how having other jobs sometimes is a necessity, or it's just a good backup. Like I read this. You
always had a plan B and a plan C, I remember.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone would love to just be able to make work, but I mean, to get to that point, maybe that will take 10, 20 years, or maybe it will never happen. So if you have other things which supplement your life, then you can leave the studio time just to be studio time, and you're not dependent on the work selling for you to live. Because when you have that pressure, it can sometimes change your relationship to what you're making, or you end up producing this thing that everyone likes because you know it will sell, and then you stunt yourself in growth.
And as you said, you've got to, you know, develop that potential for earning a living through volunteering. So yours your plan A and plan B and plan C have always been very people-centered, haven't they?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I think in my last year at the RA, I realised that I was leaving. All the free money would be gone. No more free studio in central London. I was just like, oh, how will I survive? And I mean, I'm lucky because I live at home, but I was like, I'm gonna have to pay for a studio and everything. So I was already doing some mentoring at the RA. They had a program set up. And I just spoke to...
Tell us more about that. Is that with the education department?
Yeah, it was with a learning
art school.
So someone called Anne Gilmore set that up, I think. And she asked a bunch of students if they wanted to do some work with the young people they had. And I got the opportunity to. And then I approached her and I was just like, how do I get into this in like a full-time way? And she put me in touch with somebody else. And they told me that the best thing really is to volunteer. Because like you said, people hear about you hear about things. And so I did that. And then I was volunteering at a charity called Action Space, which supports artists with learning disabilities. It's in London. And then through that, I heard about a job teaching at a school for children with special educational needs. And then I did that. And then I also got offered work at the RA. So in my last year, I had like 3 jobs, but it was worthwhile because I left like knowing that I had work lined up for me. Yeah. So yeah.
I think I mentioned to you in one of our conversations that when I graduated from Goldsmiths, I was a play leader. So I worked in adventure playgrounds.
Yeah.
And then I worked in youth clubs. Great. You know, I've always lived in South London and I really love that community. And I felt completely at home in those, you know, in those youth clubs in New Cross and Deptford.
And that's good.
And then gradually I got some teaching. But
yeah, and like things happen, don't they, just of their own accord naturally. But also it's nice to have a space where you're doing nothing to do with your work, or it's about helping other people or focusing on other
of course
people.
The ultimate thing for me, that space, was motherhood. Not anything to do with my work. But of course it began to underpin it in so many ways. So I was never really intending, it had never been on my agenda to have a family, but you know, these things happen and then you embrace them and you think how lucky you are. And that focused my mind in a completely different way. But
because time became precious, is that?
Yeah, and also I did a lot of my thinking. First thing, I had a studio at home, so we moved into this big rundown house, which I'm still in South London, and the biggest room in the house became my studio. Interestingly, a lot of women who work at home don't do that. They have the top back bedroom as their studio.
But you've got a lovely studio. I mean, when I came to sit, I was just like, wow.
The second studio where I drew you was my son's bedroom. So again, when the kids move out, I mean, our whole space is flexible.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about different ways of working through lockdown. I don't know if we talked about it here, but one of the things I had to do is I had to do far more of my own printing at every stage. So I think I've got something like 6 collapsible tables now. So you can see just one there. There's 2 actually. So sometimes, because it's a different sort of space you need when you're printing, you know, you don't need walls so much as flat spaces. But I think anything you can make it work, even if you were on holiday working in a hotel room or, you know, under a canopy in a backyard.
That's true. And do you know, I've always
healthy to invest in difficulty, I suppose.
And I feel like the prime example of that is when I went to the Dulwich Picture Gallery a few years ago. They had a David Hockney printing show, and I hate reading those little plaques they put on the wall when they explain stuff, but I think I glanced at one and it said that all the work that was made in this one room was a result of David not having any money to buy paint, and so he ended up printing. I was just like, look at that, like all of this work was a result of him not being able to paint, which is what, you know, he wanted to do, but it was such a crucial part of, you know, his practice, and he's amazing at it. I think his prints are incredible, and I think it is.
They are, absolutely.
They're phenomenal. And it just goes to show like how difficulty or restrictions or lack of access can sometimes be useful.
making me think again about drawing. But I mean, drawing underpins everything he does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so there's a good relationship between drawing and printing, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But within his painting, it's all to do with, in fact, the ones I like least are the more gestural ones where drawing isn't so apparent, like the landscapes.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I think the figurative work, and just, I don't know, I feel like it's just interesting to see how an artist overcomes something as challenging as that, and then makes it so their own. And, you know,
so Rachel, we talked a bit about the body and the way we reference our body in our work. What other sort of big subjects are there for you? Is there, I don't know, spirituality, nature? I know that you're a great gardener, aren't you? Is gardening there? I mean, those kind of...
Eileen's saying it's because she's seen all the stuff on Instagram. I post videos of my vegetables growing because I'm a loser. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the foundation of the work is me exploring my identity. And it's got to a point now where I found a way to combine my interest in abstraction and figuration. And the images that you're looking at, they're descriptions of like an inner landscape and like a black interior, like my black interior, and my imagination and my
beautifully poetic. I love that.
Yeah. And it's about trying to use color. I mean, that's such an abstract thing to talk about, so it's like, how do you make a picture of that? And again, that's where the idea of the mouths come in, and then being oversized, and like this image, for example, is like 3 large teeth, and since I suppose the sensorial experience of what that might be, and then the colors trying to feed into that.
What else is present? Are any movies or music or poetry
I read
other artists? Who's present?
Not so much other artists. The works are very self-referential, but I read a lot and I listen to music whenever I'm working in the studio. Like, there's always sound around me, and this idea of like music being closely tied to movement or stillness. So that is a great source of motivation and energy and focus for me when I'm making the work. That's really important. Yeah. But it's just, I don't know, it's one of those things where you pull things from everywhere. Do you know what I mean? I feel like your work is an example of that, where sometimes you have moments where it's about making like a portrait of someone, but then also that's so universal, isn't it? And you have works that are more about exploring your imagination and depicting creative scenarios.
The last 2 or 3 years when I was doing all these portraits, this is one of my friend Helena Lee and her baby, obviously, which I did from a drawing. So I did that after she'd gone home, and I do think my portraits are a bit misleading because they seem to be completely different on my agenda. So what I struggled with in objective drawing for many years was that how could I make my drawings from life have the resonance and the strength of my imaginative paintings? And for a long time I couldn't. And I used to start drawing and I'd pick up a pencil and they'd be like, I think I was a bit hard on myself. I think there was more of me in those drawings than I realised. But it took me a long time of keeping trying. And now I think, yes, this painting of Helena, the way it's drawn and the drawings I did of Prem, etc., and of you, they do look like my work. So it's as if I found who I am when I'm working from life as much as when I'm working from imagination. Yeah. But during lockdown, because I haven't really been doing many portraits, the magical realist bits come back in of animals have become very important, and that idea of who your companions are during lockdown.
Yeah, I mean that's. Do you feel like the people in your work or the scenarios, are they symbolic of certain time periods or emotions, or is it less specific than that?
So I'll just talk about this one quickly. It was unusual for me. It was done after I read a book called The Vegetarian. which is, I think she's Korean, the writer, and I felt that some of the imagery she was using was I'd already made those paintings, and there was one with a performance artist painted the body of a woman, actually, in the book. And that I'd already done lots of paintings with tattoos, people with tattoos. And I just felt that that was a really good thing to make a painting of. And it was, again, outside of me. So I suppose as I'm getting older, I'm struggling with this inside-outside thing of things that are very personal. But God, can you keep churning those out after a long time? This one was I went down to Pallant House to see the work of my great friend Kathy Pilkington, and she had this wonderful installation of a little figure she'd made sitting at a mirror, and the mirror was just like that, and I had a mirror like that when I was a kid. But there's also this wonderful Degas painting, a drawing of a woman combing her hair. So the two things merged for me, and then I came home and I made this. So I think more and more I'm looking out as much as this sort of trying to find out, you know, some sort of personal voice in personal imagery.
Well, it's interesting because there's no reason why it has to be one thing over the other, you know, and it's nice to go back and forth between things, and some works to resemble a certain.
What do you think you'll go back to? I mean, you're too young to have had.
Yeah, I feel like I'm at a point where I'm just constantly learning and figuring out what it is I'm doing. I feel it's so funny as well, because when I was 23, I was just like, yeah, I know how I paint, like this is me, you know, and then now I'm 29, I just feel like all of that was leading me up to a point now where I feel like I finally understand how to
do you feel optimistic about the breadth of vision and voices that we're getting now, that more and more artists of colour and people from different backgrounds are beginning to find a way through?
I think in some ways there's been progress, but then if you think about like the reality of like art school being how much it is, and cuts to the arts and like the education sector, I think things are actually going to be more difficult for people to really understand how to get involved in the arts in a way which is accessible. So at some level there has been a change, but then for the younger generation, I feel like there's a massive dearth of like support for them.
I must say, I also like the idea of us ripping everything down and having to slowly rebuild it. Because I went to art school when it wasn't a BA. I really treasure that. You didn't have to have 2 A levels to get in. You just got in on a portfolio.
And surely it was free when you went, was it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, free. We were supported on a grant. I got a grant from my local Derbyshire education.
Yeah, it's like this. It's crazy that now the only place to have that is at the Royal Academy,
and the Royal Drawing School have.
Yeah. For both of those, so both of those institutions are the exceptions to the rule.
But I think it's a duty. Sorry, I know Claudia probably wants to interrupt, but I'm just going to say, I also think it's a duty, a bit like putting your head above the precipice, whatever you put your head above, as a woman, because it makes it easier, whether you like it or not. It does make it easier for other people to do the same. And exactly the same thing you're doing, you have to accept that going to be a role model. Don't shirk that. It's a great thing.
And just taking, I mean, I feel like taking the opportunities that I have and using them in the best way that I can, and using them outside of just it being
and always giving anybody else a leg up when you can.
Yeah, exactly. It's always the case, which you're very good at doing, Eileen, which is why I'm here talking.
Claudia, do you want to interrupt?
Well, I don't want to interrupt because this is such a wonderful conversation, and it's just been so inspiring and wonderful to see all your work as well. But I am mindful that we need to draw to a close, and that there are some questions for you. So just to try and fit those in before we wrap up. But it's been incredibly interesting. And one of the questions that's come up is about subject matter and about that relationship between, or that kind of traditional relationship between artist and muse, and maybe particularly for you, Eileen, but for both of you, you know, what's your thinking about that as women artists, I suppose, particularly?
The artist and muse, did you say?
Yeah, the relationship.
I think my husband and my children have been my muse, really. Not intended in any way, and only for for a very particular part of my life. Yeah, I think it's very present in my work. Maybe the self as well, you know, the woman working. My women are quite active.
Yeah,
maybe I'm my own muse a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I am my own muse as well. And prior to this work, other women were my muse, but like Eileen said, in a very active sense. So always trying to address this idea of there being an imbalanced representation of women within art. And so what does it mean to be a woman making art? And obviously you can be a woman making art and it can be about anything, but for me it just so happened to be about looking at myself and other women I knew. So yeah.
And it was really interesting to hear you both talking about your use of colour too, and the terror of using green. I think you were saying, Eileen, and yourself through these, you know, different parts of the palette that might have been a challenge. But yeah, Rachel, I was really interested to hear about writing as being a kind of way through particular moments of challenge or obstacles in your practice. And I wondered, did that open up a new chapter? Did you find, or do you keep going back to using writing in that way? Or
yeah, no, I do, and I write now, and it has nothing to do with my art. I see it now as like a very separate thing, but it just acts as like another creative space for me to consider, I suppose, emotional landscapes, and I think all of that subconsciously filters into the painting somehow. It's hard to describe, but you know, things are all tied up with each other, aren't they? So
yeah, and the way you were discussing kind of colour as a visual language was really
exactly. So I think together.
Just following up on another question from someone in Texas, from Martha. So that's nice.
Oh my days, that's lovely.
Yeah, and just wondering about I think it was your residency in Texas, and just wondering, you know, how that came about. She's just wondering how that came about and what effect it had on your work.
Okay, well, again, panic mode. I was about to leave the RA. I thought it'd be nice to go straight into something. So in 2018, I started looking at residencies that were funded in America because I'd already been to Bermuda. And then I found the residency at the Janati Foundation, and it was set up by Donald Judd. I knew nothing about him at the time, but it just seemed like an amazing opportunity to go to a different landscape and environment. And so I applied online, as anyone can, and I got in. So I spent 2 months there last summer, and it was transformative. That's one thing I always say for students or anyone working is like travel if you can. It doesn't have to be somewhere really far, but just being in a different physical space affects what you make, because you're looking at different things, you'll meet different people, you have different experiences, and that can really shift what you produce.
Yeah. Eileen, would you have anything to say to that, you know, from residencies or working in different parts of the world or different
I've travelled, obviously. You can't make work on a family holiday. You have to remember that 15 years of my life were lugging kids around. So beyond that, I have begun to experience making work in other places, and improvising to travel light, maybe sometimes. So a mixture of a little bit of printing kit, a lot of paper, working with collage and printmaking and drawing together. So inventing new ways of working, which are quite portable. And yes, absolutely everything Rachel says about the people you meet, the sun on your skin, perhaps, or wherever you're going. And I don't think I've done it enough. And now I'll probably never travel again at this rate.
Don't say that, Eileen.
Well, I was hoping to go to Scotland this year. You know, as you also said, you don't need to travel far.
No, you don't. And can I just say, one of the things I've also benefited from lockdown, so going into the studio, spending focused time, I only ever really work for 2 hours maximum because it's quite tiring making work what I do. And then I would just come home and sit in the garden in a bikini and tan. Like the weather, like I just like rest, like cooking, like eating, like gardening, just having a life outside of my practice has been vital. It's not all about work, being in a studio. I think it's very important to have balance. So I
think that makes you a better artist. And I know so many artists, and they spend, you know, hours and hours having a cup of tea, making phone calls, you know, 2 or 3 hours working. I mean, for me, it's about 4 hours. And I love the fact that, especially during lockdown, that I'm exhausted at the end of the day, and I can go to bed and switch off, because it's the weird pressures.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it's good to break it up.
Printmaking's really tiring because there's such a lot of cleaning up,
and it's process based as well. Like, you have to think, be careful. Yeah. I mean, just it's good to have periods of rest and prioritize that. I would say.
I don't think you'll catch me in my bikini. I'll be wrapped in a blanket in the next few months.
I'm just always focused on working on my tan. I can't lie. Like, at any opportunity, I'm in shorts. It's just my life.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
A couple more questions. There's lots of questions and comments and lots of appreciation for your discussion. So just another, I suppose, about interiority again and subject matter. Someone's asking about their anxiety in making work based on themselves, and especially on the past and looking at the past. This person's saying, all I was doing was becoming stuck there, as it felt like the present wasn't worth artistic investment. Any advice on reframing that? So I suppose, how to work with kind of interiority and looking back into the past as a way of creating work.
I have to say, if it's not coming, I don't think you can force it. I think maybe that's not the sort of artist you are, unless that it's too painful. I mean, I think a lot, you know, you don't, it's just very straightforward for me when I'm making work. I can't not connect with something. I'm not very good at answering that. Rachel, I'm going to ask you to answer that.
Well, no, I think there's value in what you're saying. I think there's two things. It's either you're struggling maybe because it isn't really the subject matter that I suppose is most like generative for you artistically in producing things. And if that's the case, then you just have to be like really honest with yourself. And if it's not that, then I would say sometimes, kind of like how I was like, oh, I can't make a painting. You just have to do something which isn't the thing that you're doing. Like it's.
Yeah. I've got a comment now to add to that. That you can look for something in a book or a poem, a record sleeve, a newspaper cutting, anything, and the chances are what you're finding of interest will be connecting with something quite deep seated in you. And that's where the personal can come out.
Yeah.
When I very quickly was artist in residence at Dulwich Picture Gallery, and there's a Rubens there of, I think it's Venus feeding Mars, Mars and Jupiter, and she's squirting, I don't want to do an example of it, milk from her breast to feed this infant. Now, I just really connected with that painting. I'd never really connected much with Rubens. And of course, that was so much to do with my own experience. So I would say to the person who's struggling, get out, even if it's virtually on the net, look at things, you know, wherever you find them. And the things that you want to maybe begin to work with will already have that deep-seated connection, and don't try too hard.
I would say look outside yourself. I mean, even though you're making work, trying to make work which is personal, you still exist within a broader context. So look outside of yourself and the things that are around you, will probably resonate in a way where it comes through and helps you channel what it is that you really want to talk about. So looking at things, doing things, reading, I don't know, just whatever, you know, like be open to doing stuff which isn't
I think as a young artist it helped me as well to look very deliberately to discover women artists. Again, they're easy to discover now, but it must have been the same experience for you, Rachel, to find the work of artists of colour, which is why when you went to Lady Allison's, you described seeing the Kerry James Marshall, it was so, wow, here it is.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope that's helpful.
No, I think that, I'm sure that's very helpful. And then there's a kind of follow-up question, which in a way relates, and you've sort of answered it, but about other methods you might have for getting feedback for your work, or for seeing your work more objectively. So I suppose that goes back to that question of, you know, networks of other artists and your peers that might support.
Yeah, you definitely don't need a gallery for that. That's just something that they can help you with. But if you have, it doesn't even need to be someone within the art world, like a friend, like people who don't make art go to look at art, you know, like anyone can speak to you about what it is you're making. And it's also good to, I mean, ultimately you're in the studio on your own. So it's good to, I don't know how to explain this, but you have to be your harshest critic. Like you have to be honest with yourself about what it is you're doing, and instinctively, on like a guttural level, you know how much you connect to something or how much you believe in what it is you're making. And if you don't like something, you think you're making something which is bad, obviously there's a threshold you have to push through to get to the things that are better. But you have to be honest with yourself. If you've made a trash painting, you've made a trash painting, and you use that as something to learn from, and you know, you just keep on using it
on a practical level. My my recommendation would be start something fresh. If the thing you're confused about is not working, start another one. Now sometimes I have 10 on the go, so it shows you how confused I can get. I don't understand, but through working on other things, it can help you sort out those ones that are problematic, and you also build up a body of work that way. And sometimes just stick it away in the plant chest drawer or in a portfolio and just don't look at it. Come back to it a week, a month, 10 years later.
Yeah.
And probably 10 years later, it'll either be fabulous or you'll destroy it.
But yeah, I would agree. Just be, I suppose, be open to doing other things aside from what you're doing, because that can help you look at things anew. But I would say you have to be honest with yourself. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're doing something which you believe in when you don't.
Well, thank you. And one of the latest comments coming in has been that you should, they're enjoying it so much, and you should make a podcast together. So much more. And we have recorded this conversation, and if you're both happy, we will be putting it up on the website later. So it will be available. But yeah, maybe that's something for the future. But yes, thank you so much for sharing.
Alex, I just saw that. Thank you, Alex. Much appreciated.
It's been so fantastic to hear all your ideas and this sort of fantastic flow of energy between you, and to think about, you know, balancing whether it's community projects or motherhood, and thinking about how you integrate them in your artistic lives. So thank you so much, and everyone listening. Please do join us next week too, when we'll have Enrique Martinez Celea in conversation with Catherine Goodman and Charles Summery Smith. So lots more to look forward to. But once again, thank you so much, Eileen Cooper and Rachel Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.